So I wasn't expecting to be talking today. I don't mind, I did submit. I wasn't accepted, so this is your payback. It's okay, I forgive you, Paul. So, the science of code reviews. So there was no abstract on the website, so you might be wondering, like, what's going on? It's a fancy title. Is it clickbait? Or, well, it's not really called clickbait. There's nothing to click. But we're going to be talking about communication. We're going to be talking about code reviews, what to look for, and how to do this properly within the team. So just to manage your expectations a little bit there. Now, usually, I don't really talk about myself, at least not in the beginning of the presentation. But I thought it'd be interesting to tell you a little bit about how I got started with code reviews. So my name is Rick Kuipers. I'm Dutch. Any other Dutchies here? Nope. I was hoping you'd say no. Thank you. On Twitter, I'm Ars Kuipers. I work for a company called Enrise in the Netherlands, in Amersfoort, for those wondering. I maintain a PHP Storm Tips Twitter account. You can follow it. I don't really tweet, but you can look at all the other tweets. There's like 55 tips on there with GIFs explaining how to do it and the keyword shortcuts and everything. So that's cool. I also organize PHP Amersfoort, which is a user group. I'm a developer, speaker, and also a gamer. So before I started working at Enrise, I worked for a smaller company. It was about, I think, 5 years ago now. We mostly focused on small to medium-sized web shops and landing pages, so like campaign pages. They would be online for like maybe a few weeks, and then they would take them offline again. And we had ambitions to grow bigger, do bigger projects. But we didn't really do anything like testing, or we didn't do any reviews, or we didn't really have a very good QA process. And so I thought, all right, well, let's at least look into these techniques, right? Let's, well, teach ourselves a little bit. So I looked into unit testing, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. It was my first interaction with unit testing, and my feedback loop is getting shorter, and this is awesome, right? We did start getting bigger projects, which was really cool, very exciting. But most of the projects that we worked on were like 1 or 2 people teams. So I still felt lost during the process. I was building, I was coding, I was writing my tests, but there was still not really a way for me to check whether what I was doing is correct or is good. My test might be passing, but it doesn't say everything, right? There's more to it. So yeah, fast forward a few more months. I went to this place here. I don't know, anyone here recognizes that place? A few? All right, that's quite a few, actually. So this is an island in the Netherlands. Island's called De Kloot. Don't know why. And there's an event held here called WeCamp. So WeCamp is a 5-day coding retreat. And basically, you get put on an island with 29 other developers. Some people find that fun. I don't know. Sounds like a hell to me. But, and basically, you get put into different teams, and you have these teepees here where you sleep together with your team in separate beds, of course. And there's this place here where you can go, and we had a few tables set up, and that's where lunch was. And basically, you get to work on a project with your team. So you get put into a team, but you don't really know which team it is. So it's random people. And I was put in a team with, well, this person as coach. His name is Stefan Hochdover. He's all right. No, he's a great guy. He's also a speaker. Some of you might know him. So he was my coach. And I had this guy as well. When I see his face, I'm like, oh, it's Farky, but that's his nickname. His name is Alan, so I shouldn't mix that up. And also this guy, his name is Richard. He used to work at Enrise. He doesn't work there anymore. But this was my team. And the task was to think of a project that we could do within 5 days. Now, I can tell you, 5 days is not a whole lot of time to do a project. We started off thinking of ideas, things that we could do. And basically, we came to this idea. Oh, well, that's a spoiler. So the idea was Meetspire. Basically, it was an open source Meetup clone, which you can probably tell by now was not very successful because you're still all using Meetup.com. But Meetup.com was making some changes. They were removing the check-in system, and you have to pay to have a group, which is ridiculous, and stuff like that. So we were like, oh, we can do this better, right? So we thought Meetspire is going to be awesome. And it was actually a concatenation of Meetup and Inspire. It was a very terrible name, by the way. So we started working, and imagine you're on an island, right? You don't really have the best internet connection. So everyone's like, all right, let's start up our environments. Let's download these Vagrant boxes. And sometimes the internet would drop out. And luckily, we had USB sticks, which helped a lot. But yeah, we were on satellite internet, so that was very slow. Well, eventually, we got our environment up and running. And we started working on the project, thinking of ideas. And then this guy here, Richard, gave the idea to start doing code reviews. And I was like, you're an idiot. We have 5 days. Why would you do code reviews, right? We only have so little time. But I figured, I'm here to learn. So all right, let's do code reviews. Turns out that those code reviews were actually the most interesting part of the entire experience. It actually allowed me to really understand how decisions were being made. We're coding, but there's reason behind our coding. And you don't get to see that just by reading the code. You get to see that by talking to the people while they're writing the code. You get to see that by reviewing it, asking questions, and seeing how we get to certain solutions. It's the process that matters. So that was very interesting. It was also an easy way for us to make sure that we're all up to date. We were working on the project with 4 people, in this case, and it allows us to share the knowledge within the team. And actually, my first comment on one of the pull requests was, of course, a GIF, which is tradition. In this case, it was Daft Punk. But more importantly, we were no longer learning from our own mistakes, but also from each other's mistakes. And you learn a lot from mistakes, so this is very valuable. So what exactly is a code review? So this is a formal definition, I guess, sort of. Basically, it is the point in time where you have another person look at your code before you put it into the main branch, or however you have your workflow set up. So why would you do a code review? First thing is actually no particular order, readability. You don't know if your code is readable just by reading it yourself. That's not how you evaluate readability. Readability is when another person can read your code and understand it, right? Not according to your own logic, but also according to their logic. So that's very important. So it's actually the first time where you can see, have I produced something that is understandable, comprehensible? By the way, if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to raise your hand. Completely fine. I like some interaction. So also architecture. It allows you to take a moment, look at new code being introduced, and think, hey, are we still on the right path? Are we still doing the correct thing here? Are we not violating some architectural rules that we made up before? So make full use of that. Of course, you also have sharing knowledge. Who here works on projects without code reviews? Well, a few people. OK. I can imagine that, whose team is also bigger than 3 people? OK. So I can imagine that when you're working in a project team with more than 3 people, you're not doing code reviews, you're not doing much pair programming. It's really hard to keep track of the state of the project, right? You don't really know what's happening. You see, of course, some commits coming by and everything, but you don't know what's being introduced. So code review is a perfect way of being able to share this knowledge, being able to make sure that everyone's up to date and up to speed with the state of your project. And of course, the most obvious one is bugs. While you do the code review, you can see if there's any bugs being introduced. Speaks for itself. So there are actually a few types of code reviews. On the left here, on the left you have pair programming, where you sit together with another developer. And on the right is the pair. Left is the one where you do the remote one. There you go. It's hard. So on the right you have the remote pull request checking, where you have just a simple pull request or merge request or whatever you want to call it. And someone else remotely checks it in their own time. So let's first zoom into the pull request review one. It's basically, it looks like this, when you're on GitHub at least. You have a simple title here. There's a place for you to describe what you're introducing, what you're doing. And of course, you can see what changed and the commits and into what branch you're putting it. And it looks pretty much the same for every other platform. And this is Bitbucket and this is GitLab, although GitLab might have changed in the meantime. They had like a theme update lately. And then we also have pair programming, which is actually very interesting. It's not the focus of this talk, but I'll cover parts of it anyway, because it's a very interesting technique. So pair programming is basically when you have, well, in this case, two people, where one person is the driver. The driver is the person that writes the code, that actually does the work. And you have the navigator. The navigator is more the person who's a little bit more in the back, making sure that what we're doing matches with everything. We're not forgetting anything. That person sort of looks at the bigger picture, right? And see if we're still following the rules, so to say. So the interesting part about pair programming is that you actually have the shortest possible feedback loop there is. So with a code review, you write the code, make a pull request, and someone else checks that pull request and sees, what's the quality. That can take anywhere from a few minutes to hours to, in open source, usually a few days. So with pair programming, you have instant feedback, which is very, very valuable. And there are plenty of companies that use only exclusively pair programming and just have one branch, the master branch, and they all work in pairs, and the review from the pair programming is enough for them to commit it to master and push it to production. Now, personally speaking, I find it hard to do pair programming. I'm having enough trouble understanding my own thoughts, let alone having to actually explain my thoughts to other people. And it really drains my energy. Like, pair programming is fine. I can do it like maybe 2 hours a day or 4 if I'm feeling good. But I couldn't do this for an entire day. That would be absolutely exhausting. So if this is something you want to do as a team, then you have to make sure that everyone in the team is on board with this and everyone can handle this, basically. Now, we have another fun form of pair programming, which is mob programming. Who's done mob programming here? Wow, you're still alive as well. OK. So mob programming, basically, you have one driver and multiple navigators. Now, I've never personally done this. It would probably drive me nuts. But I have heard that it's a good way of dealing very complex problems. And of course, it's not the idea to do an entire feature as a mob, right? Don't use mob programming to do an entire feature, but mostly the critical part, like the complex part, thinking of the outline of your solution. It can be a perfectly good way of tackling those problems. So who raised their hand for mob programming? So, sir, how did you experience mob programming? Was it a good experience, or?
It was quite interesting because when we done it, there was basically two devs, so your driver and your traditional navigator. But the other guys were actually like a product manager or delivery manager as well. So the perspective that came from those guys not being technical was quite interesting when we were like basically working on that one ticket. I mean, like you say, you can't do it for too long. It is
right.
But it's more. I found more of a learning experience than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
You learn more about the product. You learn more about different sides of sort of thing.
So yeah, you have multiple perspectives to look at the same problem. I realize that we probably should have a mic, but that's difficult if I ask questions in between. So I don't know. We'll make it work. Sorry?
It's okay.
All right. All right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's indeed. You get a lot of different perspectives at the same problem, and it can be very valuable. Of course, they also say the later that you find a bug and fix it, the more time and money it costs to fix it, right? So being able to have these different perspectives early on is very valuable. Basically, you're putting your QA column from here to there to the beginning, or mirrored from here to there. All right, so I did a survey, I think it's about a year ago now, and basically I asked a few questions about code reviews. This survey, I put it on Twitter. Maybe, who filled in the survey? Probably some people. Well, you three, of course. OK. So basically, I asked a few questions, and I put them in this talk. I had 200 responses, so it's a pretty decent sample. But do realize that there's somewhat of a bias in this survey, because the people that I reach with Twitter are probably also the people that go to conferences, that are probably also the people exposed to these sort of things. So it's a little bit skewed for some questions, but other questions do come out quite well. So this question, do you have colleagues review your code? Who has colleagues review their code? The majority. All right, perfect. So this sort of makes sense then, I guess, 75%, or 73, excuse me. And 70% says only when I ask. And then we have a small amount there. We use pair programming as a form of code reviews, which is perfectly fine. Then we have no, we only rely on automated tests. All right, very confident, I like it. And also no, a tester only functionally tests the code. And we have the gray area there, no. So I asked another question. Do you feel like you learn a lot from giving and receiving code reviews? So who feels like they learn a lot from giving and receiving code reviews? All right. Is there anyone who says, nah, code reviews are the worst? All right, we have one person there. I like it. That guy over there, yeah. That guy with the gray shirt there. So you're actually that green part over there. So that also sort of makes sense here. It's a decent sample. So 96% says, yeah, I do feel like this is very valuable to me. And 4% says no, which is fine. It's, of course, how you experience it yourself. Or maybe you need better colleagues. That could also be a thing. Another question, do you enjoy getting your code reviewed? And so 87% say yes. But then we have a small percentage here, 13%. Usually, but sometimes I find it hard to accept feedback or criticism. Now, I'll be honest, I was part of the 13% when I started, because I wasn't used to having people criticize my work or give feedback like that. So I was part of the 13%, and I want to zoom in on that a little bit. So has anyone here heard of the concept egoless programming? A few people, OK. So egoless programming is pretty interesting, and I heard you two guys talk about it yesterday, I believe. Basically, I'll read it out to you. Developers need a robust enough ego to trust and defend their work, but not so much ego that they reject suggestions for better solutions. Similarly, the egoless reviewer should have compassion and sensitivity for their colleagues, if only because their roles will be reversed one day. So I found about this concept on the Coding Horror website. I think most of the people here know him. And I thought it was pretty interesting. So basically, your ego is important. Because when you build something, you got to have somewhat of an ego to feel confident, right? When you build something, you want to feel confident in what you built. It's very important. But it does not mean that every time you get criticism on the thing that you built, that you should break into some sort of defense, right, to reject their suggestions. So I found some more stuff when I started Googling for egoless programming, and I found the 10 commandments of egoless programming. Now, this deviates a little bit from the code review part, but I still think it's very interesting to share. So, number one, understand and accept that you will make mistakes. So mistakes is a very valuable part in your learning process, right? You need to make mistakes, otherwise you won't learn. So accepting that is the first step to learning from them. You are not your code. So remember, it is egoless programming, not the egoless programmer. As a programmer, you can have an ego, but whatever you create, whatever you build, should not have an ego. So you can really, really criticize your own work as well. No matter how much karate you know, someone else will always know more. So I live by a saying that goes, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. If you're the smartest person at your company, you should probably think about going to a different company, because I always learn from people that know more than me, and I always seek out other experienced developers so I can learn from them. And if I become that person, then who do I learn from? I have to learn from myself, but that costs a lot of energy to do that, so I preferably learn from other people. Don't rewrite code without consultation. So we all like our code styles, right? We have our own preferences, and sometimes when we come across code, we're like, that's not how I would do it. So a fun example is people that use loops against people that use array functions, array walk and array map versus a loop. Preferably, I think the loop is more readable, and it's nicer, it's more logical to me than 20 array functions, right? But make sure that when you have such an idea to change that code, make sure you ask the person that wrote it or ask someone else in your team, because it's important to know what the reasoning is behind this code and to make sure that you're not just changing other people's code. Because what happens is you'll change their code, and then they come across that code, and they'll be like, oh, no, let's fix this again, and then the code will change every time. So there's no point to that. Treat people who know less than you with respect, deference, and patience. I don't think I need to explain this to you. Something code of conduct. The only constant in the world is change. Accept that your code's going to change. Your code is not meant to last. Your code is always going to undergo some change. If it lasts, then that means that something's going wrong in the business. That means that the focus is shifting. Unless you have this really tiny piece of code and it works and you never touch it and it's fine and it doesn't have any impact. But most of the people here probably work on projects that are constantly changing, business requirements that are changing, and that's okay. Accept it. The only true authority stems from knowledge, not from position. So this is really important to me personally as well. It doesn't matter if you're an intern. It doesn't matter if you're a junior, medium, or senior. If you know something about a subject, if you have knowledge about it, then that means that you're the authority, right? So don't think like, I'm just an intern, I have nothing to say about this. No, if you read a lot about this subject, feel free to speak up and share that knowledge, right? It's very important. I don't care if you're a lead developer or some junior, it doesn't matter, right? So fight for what you believe, but gracefully accept defeat. This is also very important when you have a discussion with someone. Don't stick to your first point, but make sure you keep reevaluating your own position during a conversation, during a discussion, and make sure that when you realize that you're not going to win the argument, that you also accept it. Or run away crying, that's also fine. But don't be the guy in the room. This refers to the person that just comes in, grabs a coffee, sits down, puts their headset on, and not talk to anyone, and then when it's 5 o'clock, you take your headset off, you finish your coffee, and then you go home again. Now, that's not the point, right? We're working in a team. It's very important to communicate with other people. And last one, critique code instead of the people. Be kind to the code and not to the code. Again, egoless programming, not the egoless programmer. So last time yeah, there you go. I see people taking pictures. That's okay. All right. So, what to look for during a code review? Unhappy paths, a very important part. When you, as a developer, you work on a feature, and personally, I'm always very happy when it works, right? And I'm like, it's working. Oh, let's just commit it and create a pull request. Be done with it, right? But there's more to it. There's, of course, also the unhappy path that you have to walk. And some developers tend to forget that, which is okay, but it's something that you have to be aware of when you do a code review. Does it work with different inputs? Does it work when, I don't know, the server crashes or something stupid, right? When you run out of memory. PHP can do weird things when it runs out of memory and goes into an error handler, right? Are there tests added? Another easy way of checking this is by having some sort of code coverage. And the important thing about code coverage is not the absolute number, right? No one cares about 100%. What we care about is whether that number is somewhat increasing, whether it's not going down by adding new code, right? You don't want to have the code coverage drop by 0.5% when you add new code. Is the feature implemented according to specs? Always make sure you go check the original story that's behind it, the original feature that was described, and make sure that whatever the developer implemented is still according to that specification. Performance, also very important. Who here has performance tests, by the way? Performance tests? Do you run them like after every pull request, or just regularly, every month or something? Right, perfect. Yeah, so performance tests is something not a whole lot of people have. That's also because it's not necessarily a real focus of most projects, which is fine. But make sure that when you're reviewing code, look at certain anti-patterns like doing a query within a for loop and stuff like that. Simple things that you can detect early on and make sure you prevent them from damaging performance too big. And of course, also security, very important. We're very spoiled as developers with all the abstraction layers that we have. We don't really have to think about security anymore in a way. We have a doctrine that takes care of a lot of stuff, all the SQL injection stuff, and lots of other things. So, but make sure you're still thinking about it. For example, cross-site scripting. I mean, sure, we have template engines that cover some part of that, but be aware that it's still a danger. So, like I said, code reviews aren't just about the actual review themselves. It's also about communication. So I want to talk to you a little bit about code review etiquette. Something I personally find important. Not everyone will probably share that opinion with me, but I'll have a few examples. So here you see we have person blue. He says, he or she says, I usually like to keep one line between functions. Looks like you have two here. This will apply to all my comments related to code formatting, yada, yada, yada. And then person red says, that was simply a mistake when adding my code. So my takeaway from this is don't jump to conclusions. You see it's two new lines. Just give it a quick message saying like, hey, it looks like you have two lines here. Is that intended or not? That probably would be enough for the other person to be like, oh, it looks like I forgot something, let me fix it. You don't have to give a whole story about it, right? You can keep it quite brief. Here we have a person red saying, please use /** at var links / for the class properties. And we have person in blue saying, I'm sorry, I don't think this is the right convention for this. By the way, this will not be managed by CS Fixer tools. Do you have a link about that? I'm curious. And then person red says, it's fine. And then person blue says, fine what? And then person red says, it's fine to put it on one line. Now, this seems like a whole lot of overhead to me. And I would like to just take away from this to communicate clearly. Because, I mean, this is an open source project. This could have taken a few days before this was handled if people are busy, if the maintainers are busy. Luckily, it happened in one day, so that's good. But use a full sentence, please. And here we have something from Illuminate. I think that's Laravel, I'm not too sure. It says, person right here, you can't use the file exists function, because it's checking for a file somewhere. And then person red says, you must call functions on the file's object. And person blue says, thanks for the feedback. I didn't see your main points. Honestly, please correct me if my understanding is wrong. The purpose of putting this check inside, well, a whole story. The person red says, not sure you understand what I meant. This class can't know about the file system. You have to make that check through another class that does. So my takeaway from this is use examples. The nice thing about us being, well, most of us here being PHP developers, is that we have one language in common, which is PHP. So within IT, we have a lot of different nationalities, people with different backgrounds, people with different languages. Not everyone speaks English, which is OK. But we do all speak PHP, so we could have dealt with this conversation a lot quicker by just giving an example and showing through example, because we can all read PHP. Language barriers are very hard. And of course, when you have a pull request, don't forget to thank the other person for submitting it. If it's open source or closed source, it doesn't matter. A thank you is always nice. And even more importantly, leave GIFs, please. People become happy with GIFs. I think I like that person the most on the top right there. He's fabulous. Right. So with code reviews, you own the code as a team. Everything that's being introduced to the code base is being reviewed by the team, right? So always address certain things with we should or I think we should as a team. And more importantly, ask the question, what do you think? There are too many people probably who don't necessarily voice their opinion unless asked for it, right? People that are sometimes maybe quiet, people that are new in a team. Not everyone feels like they have the authority, I'm not sure if that's the right word, to tell others what they think about something. They'll be like, the guy probably knows best, right? So always trigger their thoughts. Ask the question, what do you think about this? And you'll get some amazing answers. So how do you actually get started with code reviews? I know lots of you already do code reviews. Maybe there are still some pointers in there. Introduce branching would be the first of my suggestions. Have some sort of feature branches so you can say, I want to introduce new code into the main branch. And that can be the moment where you do a pull request. And of course, automate menial tasks like code style checks and linting. You want to make sure that you want to make sure that the cognitive load for the reviewer is as low as possible, right? You don't want that reviewer to be reviewing weird syntax or code style errors, because that takes away from some of their brain power to check for other meaningful things like actual bugs or architecture. So make sure you automate that away. We have lots of tools for that. PHP CS Fixer being one of them, Code Sniffer, PHP-L, it's baked into the executable. Let everyone participate. Everyone should be able to participate in code review. Actually, I would say it's one of the best ways of onboarding a new team member, right? Just have them do code reviews. Have them understand what it takes to introduce a new feature, right? It's the best way for them to know what part of the application changes. Where should I be looking if I want to introduce something? Oh, look, there's something changing in the routes here. Oh, a controller is being added here. Oh, we have some other component here that's changing. That's very good information, right? It's a great way to have someone on board. And this should probably say eventually give everyone the right to merge. When you have someone new in the team, maybe they shouldn't have the right to merge immediately, but it shouldn't take too long for them to get it. I think everyone should be able to do this. There shouldn't be some sort of a bottleneck being a lead developer or some sort. That just takes away from the velocity. I would rather fail often than have this huge bottleneck and have the product owner wait for weeks. Now the more interesting part, I guess, improving the code reviews. So what we do at Nrise is we do code reviews and functional reviews. So as a developer, you're done with your feature, and you create a pull request, and in the pull request you say, these are the steps you have to follow to functionally test the code. And it helps because as a developer, you have a whole other perspective of looking at this feature, right? You know how the code works. You know what's being written, so you know that maybe if I do this, then it might crash, for example. So use that knowledge to functionally test the code, and that way you're absolutely sure that you're spotting bugs as early as possible. Get a third opinion, I think, is very important. This is a rule that we made within the team. When we do code reviews, we sometimes have discussions, right? Someone will say like, hey, I think it's better like this. And the problem is when the discussion between two people is kind of a horrible discussion, right? Because you have one side and you have the other side, and if neither of them will budge, then nothing really happens. So, looks good, by the way, Adam. Nice. He's wearing a kilt, he just came in. My suggestion is make sure, create a rule, right? Say the third opinion always matters, and have someone, when you have a discussion between two people, ask for a third person to come in and make it a rule that whatever the third person says, that's what you're going to go with. Of course, there can be some more critical decisions. You can postpone them, but make sure it doesn't stop the review process, because that's just a waste. There's a feature waiting to go, and if it's not that critical, then make sure you can at least push it through. Keep changes small. Very obvious, I think. It's very difficult to do a huge pull request review, so make sure whatever you have for review is relatively small. Helps with the cognitive load. And also don't trust the developer. I think it's probably the most important rule here. When the developer says, yeah, just do this and then it works, yeah, of course the person wants you to do that and that, because that's how, it's a confirmation bias, basically. So you want to make sure that you always challenge whatever the developer says. If that person says, yeah, I couldn't get it to work the other way, then ask why not, and evaluate it. Evaluate their decision and also the process behind the decision. And something that I see far too little in the field is review using your favorite tool. Who here uses PHP Storm? I know it's a dumb question. Most people. And this also works for Sublime Text or anything else. We have GitHub, which is awesome, and they have the change sets in there, right? So sure, you can do a code review on GitHub, but why would you? You can just pull in the code, compare it to the main branch that's being merged against, and use your IDE. Just do a diff in your IDE. Use PHP Storm. You have all the IDE capabilities to your availability. And that can give you a lot more insight, and it allows you to click through to certain code and really understand what's being done here. So I always encourage people to use their favorite tool and don't stick to this web interface because it's simply not enough. And one way of making sure that you're able to make decisions fast is by having a shared vision. Right? If you have a shared vision as a team, you can base your decisions on that shared vision. And it makes a lot of discussions unnecessary that you otherwise have. And then you can say like, oh, we talked about this is where we want to go, so we have to make this decision to get there, right? It takes away of a lot of the unnecessary discussions. Now, one way of creating this shared vision is an architectural exploration, which is a made-up word. We like fancy words, right? Buzzwords. So this is something that we thought of in our team. It's called an architectural exploration. And basically, while you're developing your product or project, you take notes. You take notes of things you come across, things you want to improve, and also during a code review, you see something, you're like, all right, this is not blocking right now, but this is important enough to talk about it, so take notes. Then schedule a meeting. Don't just have a regular meeting, like don't just say like, oh, we're gonna do this meeting every 2 weeks. That doesn't help. It has to be useful. It has to come from a place where people say like, oh, I really have a need for this meeting right now. We don't want unnecessary meetings. So if you have enough notes, schedule a meeting. Time box it, obvious, we do 1 hour. Present and discuss. Have everyone present their notes, make sure you have somewhat of an idea what we're gonna be discussing beforehand, and then discuss. Talk about it, talk about the problems you see, talk about your vision, where you want to go, and make sure everyone is there. So developers, architects, we even introduced a tester. We welcome the tester to our meetings to make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about, where we want to go. And this is a great way for us to make sure that this vision is carried across the entire team. So a few more questions from the survey. Why aren't code reviews part of your companies? I was very curious to see the answers to this question. And it was broken up in this, which is very spread, as you can see. So we have 38% here. Says, we have never discussed this, which is a shame. I would rather see this as 0%, even if it's not for you, which is perfectly fine. There's plenty of scenarios where code reviews are not necessary, right? At least talk about it. At least discuss it, right? So we have 30% here who says, we feel our projects are too small to do code reviews. Perfectly valid. That's fine. You don't have to do code reviews for everything. Sometimes it's not worth it. So if you have a simple landing page, you might be better off just coding away and that be it. 28% says, management thinks it's a waste of time and money, and that makes me a little bit sad because I very much disagree with this. And I'm sure most of us have been in this situation at some point, whether this is for refactoring, whether this is for code reviews, whether this is for testing or anything else, or for introducing microservices or Kubernetes. And 4% says, as a developer, I don't see the value in doing code reviews, which, yeah, all right, to each their own, I guess. So what I wanted to tell you a little bit is how I would go about convincing your company. Now, I have to give you a little bit of disclaimer. I've never been in a position where I've had to convince a company, right? So this is purely something that, to me, looks like a good idea. So that does not mean it is a good idea. So don't come telling me like, oh, it didn't work, I got fired. It's none of my business. So in 4 easy steps, because I like clickbait. So we have first, start the trend. Under the radar, it doesn't have to be something official, it doesn't have to be part of your workflow, but at least go up to your colleague and say, hey, you know, I'm working on this feature, it's a bit complex, maybe you can help me, just, you know, check my code, see if it's correct, and then tell them, you know, I'll do the same thing for you. If you're struggling with something, I can review your code real quick, and we can figure it out. And then measure the impact. See how many things you come across. See how many potential bugs you're squashing. See how much of the quality you're improving. And then the simple step of showing your boss, like, hey, look what we did. Look how much impact this has on our actual results. So it increases the customer satisfaction because basically now it's you coming across the bugs early on instead of the customer coming across them later, right? Which is much and much worse for the business. And the developers are learning from each other, which is very valuable. There's a lot of places where developers get stuck. They sort of get stuck at a certain knowledge level, and it's a shame. I mean, some developers are okay with that, but it's a shame. You preferably want everyone to grow and keep growing. So this is one way to make sure there's interaction between the developers. It takes about 15 minutes per feature. This is different to each person, but personally, from my experience, it takes about 15 minutes, not that much. And just make it part of the price. It's part of your proposition. It's how you sell yourself to your customer. We deliver quality. We do so by doing this and this and that. It's part of it. There. Are there any questions in the back? So should I get the microphone?
It's more like a joke, really. If I can add a fifth point, if you want to convince your company to use code reviews, just tell them it's agile. I heard that from another presentation earlier today, that's all.
Best argument. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, it's one person. Or funny jokes is fine as well.
So you presented two ways of doing code reviews, I guess, one being pull request and the second one being pair programming. Would you ever do sort of after the fact in-person code reviews, so over-the-shoulder code reviews, or have you had any experience with that or found any value in it?
Yeah, so I think I understand what you mean. So what I sometimes do this when I'm dealing with big pull requests, because at that point I feel it's easier to have someone to look at it together after you've written it to make sure that when there's feedback you can immediately process it. Because when you have a big pull request, it's already it has quite a bit of impact, like time-wise, and if there's a lot of feedback, then that's just kind of a bitch, pardon my language. So usually for me, then I say to the developer, hey, should we look at this together? And we can go over this. We can squash any bugs that we see quickly. And I can also explain a little bit to you, even though the explaining part should be limited because your code should be self-explanatory, right? But yeah, I do have experience with this. I don't do this structurally, but I do this when I feel like something is complex or something needs just a little bit more guidance. Yeah, that's a very good way of doing it, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Hi, so you say on this slide, measure the impact. Have there been any studies where they have actually measured codes with code review and without?
Yeah, there have been, and I have a slide for that, which is currently hidden. Oh gosh, I'm not sure I can remember. Give me 1 second. I can see if I can pull the slide up real quick because I know it's in there. No, it looks. Maybe these two. Yeah. So a study of an organization at AT&T with more than 200 people reported a 14% increase in productivity and a 90% decrease in defects after the organization introduced reviews.
Like.
Well, yeah, I was just reading from the slide because it's hidden. I can unhide it, unskip, play. There you go. This is one of the studies, which I think is pretty interesting. But there's a lot of proof that code reviews actually helps a lot. There's also a survey from Smart Bear. I don't know if you know the company. I think they developed SOAP UI and tools like that. They asked over 600 software developers, what's the best way of increasing software quality? Guess what the top 3 was? Anyone? Best way of increasing software quality? That was number 5. Testing, yeah, unit testing and functional testing were 2 and 3. And the first one, code reviews, yes, thank you. There was actually a time where no one guessed code reviews. I was like, come on, the talk, code reviews? Yeah, so yeah, the first one being code. Of course, this is an opinion from the software developers themselves, but there are also plenty of studies that prove this point, yeah. definitely. Any other questions? I don't know if I have time for it.
One of the developers in our studio was talking about pair programming, and he was saying that the way he used to do it at Sky was one developer would write the test, and then the other developer would write the codes and kind of go back and forth sort of thing. Not really a question, just a
Yeah, no, that's
an
interesting. Yeah,
observation.
I've heard of that approach as well. I've never tried it. I wonder if it actually works efficiently.
If you do a spec-based TDD, so
Yeah, that works.
basically you have the same effect, but you don't need two people.
It's interesting. I've never come across it, but thank you.
I don't know if you came across it, but a little while ago I was told that if you worked on your own, it was actually possible to get code review as well from yourself by not deploying straight away, but by putting in leaving it for a couple of days and coming back to it. It actually achieves a very similar effect to looking at someone else's code.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, so you have some sort of, you refresh your mind a little bit and then you check on it later. And I believe there's even a service where you can actually do this together, where you can, sorry? Yeah, oh yeah, so this Dutch guy, Dennis, developed an application called Lonely Pull Request. Basically, you can mention a certain user on GitHub and it will come up on a website, lonelypullrequests.com maybe. I'm just guessing the domain name here. And you can ask for a review from someone. Of course, this is mostly open source, but I believe there's also ways of doing this closed source. So, yeah. But of course, you can also do it yourself. All right. Any other questions? No? All right. If you have any more questions, then come see me after, and we can drink a beer together at social maybe. And, well, I got to go to the end. Well, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, mate.